This is the South Bank in London and the Royal Festival Hall, home of the Philharmonia Orchestra. And it was here in 1965 that the world's most famous composer paid a visit to conduct the Philharmonia in his own music. He got such a massive standing ovation at the end of the concert that he literally had to put his overcoat on before the audience would let him go. Igor Stravinsky was not only the most famous composer in his day, he was also arguably the most influential of the 20th century. Somebody recently described Stravinsky as the hippest composer who ever lived. And it sounds like a slightly flippant thing to say, but in fact there's real truth in it. If hip means to be at the cutting edge of art, then Stravinsky was definitely that. If it means to surround yourself with the most exciting, hottest in-crowd of artists of your day, again, he was that. He was friends with Picasso, Cocteau, Coco Chanel, and even the Kennedys. And nowhere was he more at the centre of a thriving, bustling art scene than in the city where his career launched, Paris. And it's there that we go to meet Jonathan Cross as we begin our Stravinsky journey.
Bienvenue à Paris Gare du Nord. Welcome to the Gare du Nord in Paris. I love this place, the noise, hustle and bustle, people everywhere, and familiar today to anyone who arrives in this city on the Eurostar, London to Paris in just 2 hours. And it was here too that a young Igor Stravinsky first set foot in the city in June 1910. His journey had been much longer, many days, all the way from his summer home in Ustylug, which is on the present-day border between Ukraine and Poland. But what had brought him all this way? The answer is one of the most extraordinary personalities of the early 20th century, one Sergei Diaghilev, or as he liked to be known in Paris, Serge de Diaghilev. He was an art collector, patron, animateur, and a flamboyant businessman. In fact, Diaghilev had been here many times before. It was he who was responsible for whipping up an almost hysterical enthusiasm amongst the Paris public for all things Russian. He'd already given them art exhibitions, concerts and opera performances, and now it was time for something totally new, a new kind of ballet. And this ballet was called the Firebird, based on Russian folktales with exotic golden Russian designs, and a troupe of dancers brought over specially from St. Petersburg, from the Imperial Ballet. Diaghilev called it his Russian ballet, or in French, les ballets russes. The dancing style was brand new, none of that classical pirouetting. And the music? Well, it was by an unknown Petersburger by the name of Igor Stravinsky. Stravinsky sat in a box with Diaghilev in Garnier's glorious Paris Opera House, looking very much like it still looks today, surrounded by the richest and most famous of high Paris society. Mark him well, Diaghilev had told the dancers of the Ballet Russe before the performance. He is a man on the eve of celebrity. And so it proved to be. The Paris public went wild at Firebird, and this 28-year-old composer's life was changed forever. Paris fell in love with Stravinsky, and Stravinsky was instantly smitten with Paris. Yet for all his cosmopolitanism, for his love of Western European culture, Stravinsky remained a Russian through and through. Though his music would change many times over the coming decades, an unbreakable Russian thread ran right through his music, right to the very end of his life. Success followed success, and the next new work was performed here at the Châtelet Theatre, opened in 1862 and still the largest theatre in Paris. Many famous performances took place here, including after 1909 with the Ballet Russe, with such dancers as Karsavina, Pavlova and Nijinsky. The new ballet was called Petrushka, based on another tragic Russian tale set in a fair about a half-man, half-puppet. Stravinsky's music was very different from Firebird, more modern. He was always pushing on, pushing forward, never happy to stand still. And so we reach another defining moment, not just for Stravinsky, but for the whole of music and dance. Diaghilev brought a brand new work to a brand new theatre, the Théâtre des Champs-Elysees, on the 29th of May 1913. You can't imagine a theatre more different from the grandeur of the Palais Garnier, built from reinforced concrete and an exterior that strips away all unnecessary decoration. It was intensely disliked by the Parisian public. It was far too German for their tastes. And as for the work that was performed on the stage, well, that upset them too. Awkward dancing, primitive, discordant-sounding music. Some quarters of the audience were so upset, they even staged a riot. One posh princess shouted at the stage, another young man pulled a spectator's top hat over his head, objects were thrown, even the police were called, or so the story goes. In fact, the riotous scenes are likely to have been a setup by Diaghilev, the master puppeteer. He'd been handing out free tickets to young students in opposition to the privileged aristocratic audience that usually came to a venue like this. After the performance, he uttered the famous phrase, "Exactly what I wanted." Quickly, the whole world got to know about the Rite of Spring, especially after 1940, when Disney used the music in his film Fantasia. And the Rite remains in the spotlight even today. At its centenary on the 29th of May 2013, it was performed here in the Théâtre Champs-Elysees and all over the world. It's a work that still excites and disturbs in equal measure.
I think that all the best music and contemporary music in the 20th century has been written in relationship to dance. And the masterpiece in that collaboration has been, of course, the Rite of Spring. First of all, it's like superb composition. It combines a highly sophisticated and very primitive presence of pulse and of rhythm. It is narrative, but in the same time beautifully abstract. The orchestra is like, you feel its physicality. It's just beautiful, and it's just an immediate invitation to dance, and it combines modern times and ancient times in a very specific signature.
It's so direct, and it communicates on such a kind of natural level. I mean, I became completely obsessed by the Rite of Spring. I'm not alone in that. I have lots of friends and colleagues who had the same experience. It kind of gets into your bloodstream. I think it's the wildness. There's lots of music which is incredibly exciting, written before it, but it makes contact with a kind of unique part of your insides. It is extraordinary. And I remember getting a score out of my local library and not being able to follow it, sort of desperate to try to follow it and listening to it over and over again. It was actually the first piece of music that I became really obsessed with from the score itself.
I think the world probably wasn't ready for it, and that's a sign of a genius, really. It's that kind of music that is not just threatening, but it has hope, and it's insistent, and it's persistent, and it does your head in if you listen to it a lot. And that's the power of it, because it affects you, because it's so relentless. He provokes emotion through patterns that were made to feel unpredictable. So it's very hard to grasp it, because it relates very much to nature. But there is a system in nature. Just because we don't understand it or we're not in control of it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so we feel powerless to it. In a sense, it makes you even more curious about it and you just want to grasp it, but it's threatening because you feel powerless. And that feeling I've never had before listening to music.
The war years were very difficult ones for Stravinsky. He and his young family found themselves exiled in Switzerland, cut off from sources of income. War and the 1917 revolutions in Russia meant it was virtually impossible to return to his home country. He wouldn't return to his homeland again until 1962. When Stravinsky returned to Paris after the war, it was a changed place. But Paris was also quickly becoming the cultural capital of the world. The French called the 20s les années folles, the crazy years. It was the time of the bright young things, of the jazz age. Stravinsky just loved to be in with the in crowd. He allegedly had an affair with the great fashion designer Coco Chanel. He worked with the French poet André Gide, with the filmmaker Jean Cocteau. In 1935, he finally moved his family here to this very apartment, number 25 Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, surrounded by the chic boutiques of all the top French fashion houses. The art of the 1920s had already become much simpler, more direct, stripped back. We hear this very clearly in Stravinsky's own music, in a work like Apollo, which he described as a ballet blanc, a white ballet with simple musical lines, white costumes, and a very clear classical choreography from Balanchine. And we see it too in, say, the pictures of Picasso, or in this glorious building by Le Corbusier, Maison La Roche. The 20s may have been roaring, but as the decade progressed, it became clear that a menace was growing, fueled by poverty and unrest. National Socialism and Adolf Hitler were on the rise, and a sense of dread was seeping through European society, even in artistic circles. And so he took his new, modern, clean, stripped-back art with him across the Atlantic to America to find new contexts for it, and also the warmth of the California sunshine.
Stravinsky's arrival in America was just as colourful and busy as you would expect. He was still composing furiously, lecturing at Harvard University, and even getting in trouble with the police for his rather spicy arrangement of the Star-Spangled Banner, the American national anthem, which apparently you're not allowed to do. Hollywood brought with it a new kind of celebrity for Stravinsky. In 1940, Walt Disney used music from the Rite of Spring to accompany a sequence of terrifying dinosaurs in his groundbreaking film Fantasia. But was it just the Hollywood celebrity that attracted Stravinsky to Los Angeles, or was there more to it? To answer that question, let's join a European composer and conductor who's made his home in LA. He's also principal conductor of the Philharmonia Orchestra, Esa-Pekka Salonen.
This is the Santa Monica Beach, California. This would have been the spot where Stravinsky would have taken his beach walks in the 40s and in the 50s. He lived in LA for 29 years, which was the longest time he spent in any one place on the planet. It must have been a really dramatic and depressing and complex moment in Stravinsky's life. Back in 1939, he is on an ocean liner leaving Europe behind. His wife has died, he has lost a daughter. Europe is going up in flames. He hasn't been back to Russia since the revolution. On some level, he must know that he will never be back in Europe on a permanent basis anymore. His English is not great. He's 57 years old, i.e. not a young man, and he knows that he has to start a new life in a new country, in a culture that he doesn't know very well. He's famous, but not rich, and he doesn't quite know how things are going to pan out. Stravinsky was somebody who was always reacting to his environment, and I think this happened to some degree to Stravinsky right away. He had this chameleon-like quality.
And Los Angeles did change Stravinsky. Stravinsky was very influenced by the world around him, from the early music he heard to the new music, to everything.
What is it about LA that makes it special? It's gonna sound cliche, but it's the openness. You know, it's the American West. We're still defining it.
We look west as much as we look east, and we look south. So we are connected to Asia, we are connected to Latin America. I mean, what defines the city is that you can't define the city.
And so it's this sense which you get from California is music here is to taste and touch, as well as hear and see.
Stravinsky was huge. It would be hard to think of somebody in culture who was much bigger than Stravinsky. I mean, there would be maybe Einstein, Picasso, Stravinsky. These were figures you knew were historic.
It's very hard to imagine somebody who was declared the best composer in the world, the greatest composer alive. How did he relate to his environment? What did he think of other people's music and so on? It's impossible to imagine. If you are permanently on a pedestal like that, it must be quite difficult to relate to not only other people's music, but also your own.
He was a tiny, tiny little man. You know, he spoke a little English, not much. He just seemed, he was a historical presence. He lived in the hills above the Sunset Strip in West Hollywood. It was a convenient place to be, and it was a very lovely place to be. It's very different than it is now. The city was not as overrun as it is now. It's easy to get around. You know, it was quite idyllic. I mean, we all thought he was nothing like anything we had ever seen. You know, you knew that this guy was a historical figure, but he wasn't in any way connected to our world. And we never felt that. We never felt that musically. We never felt that in any way. I thought he was an alien. When I was beginning university at UCLA in the mid-60s, and very close to the school was the most sophisticated, maybe best record store in Los Angeles. And Robert Kraft would buy records there every week for Stravinsky, or regularly for Stravinsky, things that either Stravinsky wanted or he wanted Stravinsky to hear. And we all knew this, all of us music nerds, so we would go. We didn't know when he would be there. I actually never did see him there. But we would just go and find out from the clerks, what did Robert Kraft buy this week? And then we wanted the same thing. We wanted to hear the same thing. He had a lot of street cred for picking up on Weber and picking up on all the stuff that we thought that mattered. So we were fascinated by what he was doing. I mean, you didn't necessarily understand what he was doing, but really wanted to hear every single thing he wrote. We wanted to know what he was thinking about. We read the conversation, but we wanted to know all of this stuff. And the fact that he was interested in all the things around him and he was picking up on this stuff, and particularly the interest in Weber, and that gave him a huge amount of credibility, at least amongst young people.
I think when Stravinsky came here, he was hanging out with the Russian group of emigres and so on, but soon started seeing people like Otto Klemperer, who was conducting the Philharmonic at the time. And he was, of course, very interested in literature. So he drank whiskey with Dylan Thomas, and Huxley became a very close friend of his. And they, of course, shared an interest in literature, but also whiskey.
Most of these were emigres who fled Europe during the war, fled the Nazis. Great many of them were. And there had been actually a wave of emigres before then. The film business brought composers. The film business, there was work. So that helped. And then the recording studios and that. But in many cases, when the emigres came to the States, they just thought this was a much more a healthier, better place, an easier place to live. In some ways, even though New York would seem more amenable to the German emigres, they actually felt more at home here in a way. And once there were some here, then others came and they had communities.
Of course, the major other composer in LA at the time was Schoenberg. While the two giants admired each other, I don't think they were very close in any way at all. Schoenberg was very suspicious of Stravinsky's neoclassical style and wrote a little piece where he was kind of making fun of Stravinsky's use of C major and so on. But there was a lot of respect. This I know for a fact.
Stravinsky's music appeals to your intelligence and to your ability to ask questions, and holds the mystery and the understatement, and says this music is about something way deeper than special effects. The words of Symphony of Psalms are, "I come as a stranger as all my fathers were," and you get this beggar who is a stranger forever, who arrives at the place of his transcendent vanishing from this world and says, "Put into my mouth a new song," which of course is also what Igor Stravinsky, the composer, is praying for when he has to keep the avant-garde alive and he's run out of tricks. He's the history of modern music. How can you compete with yourself? You wrote the Rite of Spring, and now you're a middle-aged composer. What do? So when he writes this prayer to God, "Put into my mouth a new song," it comes from the core of his being.
It's an interesting thought, actually, to think about what somebody who absorbs so much of culture would do if you added another century to their life. He had the capacity to continue growing, and I find that to be an incredibly admirable trait.
To some degree, it is utterly ridiculous to be compared with somebody like Stravinsky. However, technically speaking, we are in the same business, so I can, to some degree at least, imagine how he felt about some things. And the challenges are the same. To make something out of nothing. The further away from the 20th century we move, the larger Stravinsky looms. This is not the case with all composers of the last century, but it's very clear to me that Stravinsky will be one of the giants next to Beethoven, Bach, and Brahms, and so on.
Stravinsky never stopped working tirelessly, and despite the fact that his home was now in LA, he still globe-trotted. He was working, recording, composing, all over the place, and in 1965 he came here to London, to the Royal Festival Hall. He was 83 years old, and on the 14th of September that year, he conducted the Philharmonia Orchestra in the piece that had made him famous in Paris all those years ago, the Firebird. This is the programme for the evening. And in his programme note at the end, Stravinsky describes how he's conducted this piece over 1,000 times. Once, he says, I was addressed by a man in an American railway dining car, quite seriously, as Mr. Firebird. When you watch the footage of that evening in London and you see the standing ovation from the audience, it's completely clear how important it was for Londoners that Stravinsky himself was there. And still today, decades on, long after his death, Stravinsky is still an incredibly important figure and inspiration for creatives and artists living and working in this city.
As an instrumentalist, you look forward to playing the music of composers who, I can only use that expression, they like give you gifts in what they write. I mean, Mozart is just heaven, Haydn as well. But Stravinsky admired them enormously and learned a lot from them. And in a different sort of way, he gives you gifts in his writing for the individual instrument.
I heard here at the Festival Hall where we are now, the Rite of Spring when I was 14, which was the first time I'd seen it live. And it blew me sideways. It absolutely knocked me over. I've still got my diary entry. And it's just open-mouthed with astonishment that night. Bum 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 bum. Rum bum. He's starting something up that was going on its merry way and then driving a truck into it from the side and completely derailing it and loving the carnage, loving the oral and the physical carnage. And I thought that was tremendously exciting, and I think he did too. He never keeps on one track long enough for you to go, yeah, I know where we are, because some other truck will come in and derail it.
He manages to pimp out tiny little ideas, scales, little chords, little rhythmic fragments into these monstrous, exaggerated, superhuman versions of themselves. And he manages to treat the humblest of material in this excited, joyful, no restraints way. I think it's important to keep reflecting on who you are and what you do, maintaining the stuff that you love, but dropping or evolving the things that you're not so excited about anymore.
Even though it's repetitive, it's also a journey from beginning to end, but that end has a new beginning.
By the time you're thinking, oh, he's done this, he's moved on, like David Bowie or Madonna, you know. You think, oh, what's this? Catch up.
He was just an extraordinary person to be around. He was very, very funny, but also he was just fascinating about everything.
It still feels contemporary to me. I still don't understand it.
How attractive it must have been for a world-famous, probably the most world-famous composer, to rest on his laurels, and how admirable that he doesn't.
We've followed Igor Stravinsky on an extraordinary lifetime's journey. Just think how much the world changed during his life. He was born in 1882 and died in 1971. His journey has taken us to some of the great cities of the world: St. Petersburg, Paris, Los Angeles, London, and his final resting place in Venice. But above all, Stravinsky's journey is an artistic one. He constantly reinvented himself, from his early days as a Russian ballet composer through his neoclassical period to his final interest in serialism. There are lots of different versions of Stravinsky, depending on the context in which you come across him and his music. But I think the one thing that continues to inspire artists and audiences is that curiosity he had for life. And it's because of his engagement with the world and his constant curiosity that I think he's still such an inspiration for us today.
He's coming back. Now. Well, he has his overcoat on. Fit to the end. His appearance here at the age of 83 with the new Philharmonia Orchestra will long be remembered. London obviously doesn't want to let Stravinsky go. As Stravinsky waves again. We end our tribute to a composer in a long lifetime who has already won the description great. In his own words, he said this: "I live neither in the past nor the future. I am in the present. I cannot know what tomorrow will bring forth. I only know what the truth is for me today. That is what I am called upon to serve, and I serve it in all lucidity." From the Royal Festival Hall, good night.